Ilara Vance stared out of the observation window of the human council ship, her reflection merging with the black expanse of space. Stars blinked like distant lanterns, cold and indifferent to the struggles of those who lived among them. Her mind, sharp and restless, raced with the latest news from the outer colonies. Reports of Krath fleet movements had arrived that morning, painting a picture of unstoppable might and precision. The Krath were powerful, their empire vast, and their technology far beyond humanity's current understanding. But they were not invincible, Ilara reminded herself. Humanity had survived worse, yet this time felt different. The Krath were not merely raiding, not merely testing human defenses, they were planning something greater, something calculated. The Council's envoy had returned with news that made her stomach twist. Humanity had been summoned to the Krath homeworld to discuss a treaty, a meeting of leaders. The Council called it an opportunity, Ilara called it a nightmare. When the Council summoned her later that day, the weight of the situation became tangible. She had been recognized not just for her intelligence, but for her uncanny ability to find solutions to problems others deemed impossible. That talent had brought her to the attention of the Council, and now to the attention of an alien empire that saw humanity as both a threat and a resource. Ilara, Councillor Thane said, his voice low and serious. He gestured toward the hollow screen that projected the figure of the Krath general. His armor shimmered in metallic green and his four arms moved with deliberate grace. His face, sharp and angular, exuded authority, but there was something colder behind his eyes, something unyielding. This is General Xyler. You will be attached to him during the negotiations. To be paired with him was an honor in diplomatic terms, but a personal trial in every sense. You want me to, what exactly? She asked, keeping her tone steady. Marry him, Thane said bluntly, his eyes not leaving hers. It is a political requirement. Humanity is weak compared to the Krath, and this marriage will symbolize our willingness to cooperate. The Council believes you are capable of navigating this delicate situation with intelligence and grace. Fail, and humanity's colonies may be lost. It was another thing entirely to bind herself in name and in law to someone so alien in every sense. But she had always prided herself on keeping calm under pressure. She nodded. I understand, she said. I'll do it. Prepare yourself. Would the Krath allow her autonomy, or would she be forced into rigid compliance? Questions swirled, but one thought remained firm. She would not be passive. When she finally arrived at the Krath capital, she was struck immediately by the scale of the empire. Massive towers of polished metal reached into clouds that shimmered with unnatural colors. Ships moved in patterns so precise they seemed choreographed, and the sheer number of beings, Krath of every rank, shape, and size, was overwhelming. Humans were rare here, and their presence drew curious and suspicious glances. Xyler met her at the landing platform. He was taller than she had imagined, his presence commanding even without his four armored limbs fully extended. He observed her quietly, his eyes calculating, as if measuring every detail before speaking. You are the human, he said finally, his voice deep and even. It carried a subtle resonance, as if the words themselves demanded attention. I am General Xyler. This union is temporary, for politics, not personal preference. And I intend to make it effective. When she proposed a new approach to monitoring starship movements using predictive algorithms, the general allowed her access to data that had been tightly controlled. Her suggestions improved fleet efficiency, reducing response times to threats and increasing the accuracy of patrols. Xyler watched her work with quiet fascination. At first, his silence seemed like judgment, but gradually she began to see subtle approval in his gestures, the way he would pause and consider her recommendations seriously before implementing them. The other Krath officers started seeking her input, hesitant but curious. It was a small victory, but one that gave her confidence. Evenings, however, were challenging. Dinner with Xyler was formal, almost ritualistic. She ate in silence, learning his habits, the cadence of his speech, the way he observed everything around him. At times, she felt like a student under an exacting tutor, but she reminded herself that patience and observation were part of the strategy. One night, as she reviewed maps of disputed territories, Xyler spoke in a tone that was almost conversational. Your species is unpredictable, he said. You take risks we would consider foolish, yet often those risks yield success. If you don't, I might surprise even myself. Stories of the human who dared to stand beside the feared general spread quickly, painting her as a symbol of ingenuity and courage. In secret, Alara began corresponding with sympathetic human colonies, sharing insights and advice on how to prepare for possible conflicts. Her influence grew quietly but steadily. Xyler, for his part, continued to challenge her, demanding precision in her calculations and clarity in her reasoning. They argued over tactics, debated over ethics, and occasionally found themselves laughing over small, unexpected things. A shared understanding that even in the midst of political tension, intelligence and creativity could bridge differences. Then came the first true test. A rogue Krath faction had begun raiding neutral planets near the Outer Rim. These were not sanctioned attacks. They threatened to destabilize the fragile political balance. Alara and Xyler were tasked with responding. Alara proposed a plan that combined human ingenuity with Krath discipline. Using feints, predictive modeling, and rapid response teams, they intercepted the raiders before major damage could occur. The operation was a resounding success, and even Xyler's closest advisors were forced to acknowledge the brilliance of her tactics. "You have proven useful," Xyler said during the debriefing. "More than I expected." "I aim to exceed expectations," she replied. As weeks passed, Alara learned that power did not always belong to the strongest. Sometimes it belonged to the cleverest. By understanding both the human and Krath perspectives, she was able to navigate complex negotiations, prevent unnecessary conflicts, and slowly shift perceptions of humanity across the Krath Empire. Yet the challenges were far from over. News arrived that rival empires were forming coalitions, concerned about the growing influence of this unusual alliance. Reports of spies, sabotage, and subtle political maneuvering reached her regularly. Each day, she had to balance diplomacy with strategy, persuasion with intelligence gathering. It was exhausting, but she thrived on the challenge. In quieter moments, Alara would sometimes reflect on her situation. She had married a general who was 33 years her senior, an alien whose ways were entirely foreign to her. And yet, through intellect, courage, and persistence, she was carving out a place for herself, not just as a diplomat, not just as a human, but as a force capable of changing the course of galactic events. Xyler, for his part, remained enigmatic. He did not offer friendship easily, nor did he show overt warmth. But his respect, slowly revealed in subtle acknowledgments, gestures, and careful consideration of her ideas, was more valuable than any display of affection. In the cold and calculated universe of the Krath, it was clear that mutual respect could be as powerful as any alliance forged in law or battle. By the end of the first month, the human who had been forced into an alien marriage had not only survived, but had begun to thrive. She had earned a place at the side of one of the galaxy's most feared leaders, and she had started to demonstrate that humans, underestimated for centuries, could be more than they seemed. The galaxy, she realized, had yet to understand the full potential of humanity, and perhaps, in time, it would come to regret ever underestimating them. Alara looked out over the city from the tower where she now had her own office. The lights of the Krath capital shimmered below, reflecting her determination. She had entered this world as a tool of diplomacy, a symbol of political necessity. But she would leave it as something more, a force that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. She would make sure of it. And perhaps, just perhaps, the galaxy would soon learn that humanity was a species not to be underestimated. Alara Vance quickly realized that surviving in the Krath Empire required more than intelligence. It required observation, patience, and an understanding of the alien culture that went far beyond what her training had prepared her for. Xyler, the general she was married to, was brilliant but exacting. Every decision he made, every movement he executed was calculated. Nothing happened without thought, and nothing went unnoticed. He expected perfection, and at first, Alara felt every action she took would be judged as a failure. The first few weeks had been a test. Xyler observed her work with an intensity that often made her feel exposed. She could see the way his eyes followed her, not with curiosity alone, but with the cold scrutiny of someone who had led countless battles and understood the cost of mistakes. Yet within that scrutiny, she detected an unusual openness. He listened. He considered her suggestions. He even allowed her to challenge his decisions. It was during one such discussion that she made her first significant impact. A series of trade disputes had arisen in the outer colonies, minor skirmishes that could have escalated into full-blown war if mishandled. Alara proposed a solution that combined human negotiation tactics with Krath discipline. She suggested offering technological assistance to the colonies while simultaneously deploying a small, highly mobile Krath unit to monitor the region. Xyler listened silently as she outlined her plan. His 4 arms rested on the table, fingers moving rhythmically, an alien gesture that meant he was considering the weight of her words. For a long moment, he said nothing. Ilara held her breath, aware that her future and possibly the fate of many human colonies depended on his response. Finally, he spoke. "Your proposal is unconventional." There was no warmth in his voice, only calculation. "It could succeed or fail spectacularly. Explain why you believe it will work." "You will oversee it." Ilara coordinated communications between the human colonies and Krath forces, carefully monitoring the response of both sides. As the days passed, her strategy unfolded with remarkable efficiency. Conflicts were contained, trade resumed, and the colonies reported satisfaction with the outcome. Xyler observed her from his command post, noting the way she adapted to unexpected changes. When a Krath patrol reported an ambush on a trade convoy, Ilara quickly recalculated troop movements and deployed reinforcements in a manner that minimized casualties. Xyler found himself impressed. Humans, he realized, were capable of ingenuity in ways that even the Krath could not always predict. "You anticipate," he said to her one evening, his voice quieter than usual. "You see possibilities that others overlook. That is valuable." She was consulted on logistics, colony management, and even on the design of new starships. Her perspective as a human brought fresh ideas that complemented Xyler's experience. While the Krath were disciplined and methodical, humans were adaptable and creative. Together, they began to form a formidable team. Yet not all interactions were smooth. Many Krath officers viewed her presence with suspicion. They whispered among themselves, questioning the wisdom of allowing a human, someone they considered fragile and unpredictable, to influence military strategy. Ilara learned to navigate these tensions carefully. She remained polite, professional, and firm, demonstrating competence at every turn. Slowly, grudging respect began to replace doubt. One afternoon, Xyler called her to the command center for a briefing. A neighboring star system had reported unusual activity, small ships moving in patterns that suggested reconnaissance for a larger operation. Xyler turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Your thoughts?" he asked. Ilara studied the data, analyzing movement patterns, fuel signatures, and communication logs. She traced potential routes the ships could take and identified vulnerable points where a Krath fleet could intercept them. "If these are reconnaissance ships," she said, "they are likely testing our response times. A direct confrontation could reveal too much. I recommend a staged engagement that simulates weakness while drawing them into a controlled trap." "We will follow your plan." The success further solidified her reputation, and even skeptical officers began to acknowledge her skill. Amid the strategic victories, Ilara began to notice subtle changes in her relationship with Xyler. The initial cold formality was gradually giving way to cautious trust. He would ask her opinions more frequently, sometimes even seeking clarification on minor details that he previously would have decided unilaterally. She observed him during planning sessions, noting the way he respected her analysis, even when it challenged his assumptions. Despite their growing professional bond, there were personal moments as well. One evening, while reviewing maps in the quiet of their shared quarters, Xyler spoke of his past campaigns, describing battles fought decades earlier, victories and failures alike. Ilara listened, fascinated by the perspective of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering strategy and command. She began to understand that his rigor and discipline were not cruelty, but a way to ensure survival in a harsh and unforgiving universe. "You have a different approach," Xyler said, almost as if thinking aloud. "You consider consequences not only for yourself but for others. That is unusual. We anticipate risk differently." For Ilara, the acknowledgement was enough. She knew that influence and respect were far more powerful than emotional attachment in this context. News arrived from human colonies that rival alien factions were planning incursions, seeking to exploit perceived weakness in Krath leadership. Ilara began analyzing the intelligence, creating simulations and contingency plans. She worked late into the nights, Xyler often watching silently, offering input but allowing her to take the lead. Their combined strategies prevented several potential conflicts, each success strengthening the perception that humanity was a formidable partner rather than a weak subject. At a ceremonial gathering celebrating the defense of multiple colonies, Krath officials openly praised her contributions. The event, meant to honor military leaders, became a platform for showcasing the unusual alliance between human ingenuity and Krath discipline. Rumors spread quickly across the Empire. The human who had been forced into marriage with General Xyler was not only surviving, but actively shaping military and political outcomes. Alara understood the importance of this perception. Humans had long been underestimated, their colonies dismissed as inconsequential. By demonstrating competence and foresight, she was changing that narrative. Even within the Krath Empire, whispers began to circulate about her influence, and rival factions started reconsidering their assumptions about human capability. Xyler, for his part, began to acknowledge publicly her contributions during strategic briefings, praising her analysis and creativity. These acknowledgments were rare from the general and carried significant weight. Officers who once doubted her abilities now deferred to her judgment in many situations, and even Xyler's closest advisors recognized that her input was no longer optional, it was essential. One night, as they reviewed data from a recent operation, Xyler made a rare personal comment. "You are persistent. You do not yield even when faced with doubt or resistance." That is admirable. She had moved from a position of enforced alliance to one of mutual respect, demonstrating that intelligence, courage, and adaptability could bridge even the widest cultural gaps. By the end of the second month, Alara had established herself not just as a diplomat or advisor, but as a strategic mind respected across the Krath Empire. Her marriage to Xyler, once a symbol of political subjugation, had become a platform for demonstrating human potential. The general, once distant and formal, now consulted her regularly and incorporated her ideas into operational decisions. The galaxy, though unaware of the full extent of her influence, was beginning to notice that humans were no longer a weak species. Reports of successful joint operations, efficient conflict resolution, and innovative strategies attributed to Alara began to circulate, challenging long-held assumptions. Humanity, it seemed, was capable of far more than anyone had imagined. Alara reflected on the path that had brought her here. She had entered the Krath Empire as a tool of diplomacy, a political symbol, and a human expected to comply. Yet, through intellect, strategy, and patience, she had carved a space for herself where her voice mattered, where her ideas could change outcomes, and where she could influence an empire that had once seemed unassailable. As she looked out over the city lights from Xyler's tower, she understood that this was only the beginning. Challenges would continue, rival empires would test her, and her human colonies would always need guidance. But she also knew that she had already proven one undeniable truth. Humans could be as cunning, strategic, and impactful as any alien species in the galaxy. And in that realization, she felt a quiet sense of triumph. The galaxy may have underestimated humanity, but under her guidance, and with the unlikely alliance with Xyler, humans were beginning to reclaim their place among the stars. The ripple effects of her actions were just starting, and she intended to ensure that humanity would be seen as a species not to underestimate, not ever again. Alara had settled into a rhythm with General Xyler, yet the galaxy was far from quiet. Reports began arriving from the outer territories, small uprisings, secret attacks, and unexplained disappearances of starships. These incidents were not sanctioned by the Krath leadership, yet they caused unrest among allied planets. Alara studied the reports with focused intensity. She knew that these rogue actions could escalate into full-scale wars if ignored. "What is your assessment?" Xyler asked, leaning over the data pad. His voice was calm but held the weight of command. He rarely needed to ask questions, and when he did, it meant he valued her insight. Alara tapped the screen, highlighting patterns in the attacks. "These are coordinated," she said. "They are testing boundaries, probing weaknesses. They are not random. And they are doing it to force a reaction from us. They believe the Krath will act impulsively. I suggest a controlled response, something that appears defensive but actually positions us advantageously." She proposed using small, fast fleets to simulate vulnerability, drawing the rogue groups into ambushes where their movements could be tracked and contained. At the same time, she suggested deploying drones to gather intelligence on hidden bases. It was a strategy that balanced caution with opportunity. Xyler nodded slowly, the first hint of approval crossing his face. "You are thinking beyond immediate threats. Very well, execute your plan." The rogue Krath factions, confident in their stealth, moved into positions that played perfectly into Alara's hands. When the fleets engaged, the result was decisive. The rogue ships were intercepted with minimal damage to surrounding systems, and crucial intelligence was captured, revealing secret facilities where the factions had been plotting attacks. Xyler observed from the command platform, noting the precision with which Alara's plan had unfolded. He had commanded countless battles, but the human's ingenuity had achieved what many veteran officers had not. "You have outmaneuvered them," he said quietly. "Impressive." The success had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate operation. The intelligence recovered from the rogue factions revealed the existence of a secret Krath project, a massive effort to develop technology capable of subjugating weaker planets. The project had been hidden from most Krath leaders, and if it fell into the wrong hands, it could destabilize the entire region. Alara pored over the schematics, her mind racing. She understood immediately that while the technology was powerful, it was also vulnerable to human ingenuity. She proposed a countermeasure: modify and redirect the technology to neutralize the rogue factions without causing widespread destruction. Her plan required precise timing, careful coordination, and absolute secrecy. Xyler listened as she explained the approach, his expression unreadable. "You propose using our own tools against them?" he asked. "Yes," Alara said. "We turn their weapon into a shield, they will be neutralized, and we avoid unnecessary harm to innocent colonies." "Proceed." The team operated under tight security, and Alara found herself navigating not only technical challenges, but also cultural differences, ensuring that communication was clear and collaboration effective. The operation began in stages. First, they intercepted the rogue fleets, drawing them into controlled areas where the technology could be deployed safely. Drones and sensors provided continuous updates, and Alara made rapid adjustments to account for unexpected maneuvers. Every decision had consequences, and she felt the weight of responsibility keenly. When the moment came to activate the modified technology, the results were extraordinary. The rogue factions were incapacitated, their ships neutralized without loss of life. The intelligence gathered allowed the Krath to dismantle hidden bases, preventing future threats. Xyler watched silently, a rare trace of admiration in his eyes. "You have done what few could accomplish," he said afterward. "You have protected the Empire and its allies while minimizing harm. That requires both courage and calculation." This was more than praise. It was acknowledgement from a leader whose respect was earned only through results. As the operation concluded, news spread throughout the Krath Empire and beyond. Stories of the human who had outsmarted rogue factions and neutralized a hidden threat traveled quickly, reaching rival empires and human colonies alike. The perception of humanity began to shift. Where once humans had been considered weak and inconsequential, they were now recognized as clever, resourceful, and capable of decisive action. Despite the accolades, Alara remained focused. She knew the galaxy was vast and challenges were constant. She began working on long-term strategies to strengthen human influence, using her position to advocate for increased collaboration, technological exchange, and shared defense initiatives. Her approach was methodical: build alliances, earn trust, and demonstrate value through action. Xyler observed her strategies closely, often asking questions and offering insight. He had a deep understanding of military tactics and political maneuvering, and he saw how Alara's human perspective complemented his experience. Together, they began to shape the Krath Empire's approach to diplomacy and defense, blending human adaptability with alien discipline. As their partnership strengthened, Alara noticed subtle changes in the general. He remained reserved, yet his interactions showed a growing respect. He began to consult her on matters beyond immediate operations, seeking her input on political negotiations and colony administration. Their conversations, once limited to strategy, now included discussions about culture, ethics, and the responsibilities of leadership. Alara found herself fascinated by these exchanges. She had entered the Krath Empire as a human diplomat, forced into an alien marriage for political reasons. Yet she had become a trusted advisor and strategist, influencing decisions that affected entire star systems. She realized that intelligence and determination could bridge even the widest cultural divides. One evening, as they reviewed reports from a recent operation, Xyler spoke in a tone that was almost conversational. "You think differently than we do," he said. You consider consequences not only for immediate gain but for the broader picture. That is unusual. It is not unusual, it is necessary. Humans were beginning to be seen as capable partners, not as weak subjects or insignificant observers. Over the next several weeks, Alara continued to expand her role. She coordinated joint exercises, introduced innovative communication systems, and worked to integrate human technologies with Krath infrastructure. Her efforts improved efficiency, reduced risk, and strengthened the bonds between human colonies and the Krath leadership. Rival empires, once dismissive of humanity, began to take notice. Reports of Alara's success reached them, and they began to reconsider their assumptions about human potential. Even within the Krath Empire, whispers of admiration and intrigue circulated among officers who had once doubted her abilities. Yet Alara remained focused on the mission. She understood that recognition was secondary to results. Her goal was clear: protect human interests, influence Krath's strategy for the benefit of all allied colonies, and demonstrate that humans could contribute meaningfully to the galaxy. The next challenge came unexpectedly. Intelligence indicated that a coalition of alien factions planned to exploit the success of her previous operations, attempting to manipulate weaker systems into rebellion. Alara immediately began analyzing potential outcomes, anticipating the moves of rival leaders and designing strategies to counteract them. Xyler watched her work with interest. "You anticipate moves far in advance," he said. "Your mind is disciplined in a different way than ours. It is effective. If one plan fails, there is always a backup. If that fails, another is ready. It is how we survive." Her reputation grew, and with it, the understanding that humans could act decisively, not just reactively. As the months passed, Alara's influence within the Krath Empire solidified. She had moved from an outsider, a human married to an alien general for political reasons, to a strategist whose insight was respected and sought after. Xyler, once distant and formal, now valued her counsel deeply. Their partnership, built on intelligence, adaptability, and mutual respect, had begun to shape the future of the galaxy in ways few could have anticipated. Alara looked out over the city lights from her quarters, reflecting on the path she had traveled. She had entered the Krath Empire uncertain and cautious, but she had established herself as a vital force. Humans, once underestimated and dismissed, were now beginning to demonstrate their true potential. The galaxy had yet to grasp the full extent of what humanity could achieve, and she intended to ensure that it would not forget. Through strategy, courage, and unwavering determination, she had begun to prove a simple truth. Humans could not only survive among the stars, but could shape their destiny in ways that even the most powerful alien empires would come to respect. Alara Vance had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the Krath Empire, but she knew the galaxy was never truly calm. Intelligence reports had begun to arrive indicating that rival empires were uneasy with the sudden rise of human influence. These factions were testing boundaries, looking for weaknesses in Krath defenses and hoping to exploit any misstep. Alara reviewed each report with meticulous care. She understood that inaction could have disastrous consequences, but rash action could be just as dangerous. The key was balance, calculation mixed with creativity. Xyler, seated across from her in the command chamber, observed her while she analyzed the intelligence data. His four arms moved in measured gestures as he reviewed reports, but he left the decision-making to her. There was an unusual trust there, an acknowledgement that her human perspective brought a kind of advantage even a general of his experience could not replicate. "You see more possibilities than I would consider," Xyler said quietly. "Your mind works differently. We have learned that rigid strategies can fail when the universe is uncertain. Flexibility keeps us alive." Ships appeared suddenly, attempting to disable the planet's defense grid before disappearing into hyperspace. Alara had anticipated such moves and had prepared contingency plans. She coordinated a rapid response operation, combining Krath patrols with human-controlled drones to create a defensive network. The engagement was brief but decisive. The attacking fleet was intercepted and the planet remained secure. Yet the attack was only a test, and Alara knew it would not be the last. Rival empires were probing weaknesses, and if they succeeded in destabilizing a single system, the consequences could ripple across the galaxy. "Your plan worked well," Xyler said as the reports came in. "You predicted their actions accurately." "Few could do so." Assassination attempts, Sabotage of starship yards and infiltration of political networks were all reported. Alara analyzed patterns, predicted likely targets, and designed preemptive measures. She created secure communication channels, implemented new security protocols, and trained elite units in rapid response techniques. One night, Xyler called her into his private office. The room was dimly lit, and the hum of the city outside created a quiet backdrop for the discussion. "Your strategies have prevented numerous disasters," he said. "Yet the galaxy does not rest. What is your recommendation for the next step?" "Intelligence gathering alone is not enough. We need controlled operations to disrupt their coordination before they can strike. Precision, not aggression, will allow us to protect our colonies without escalating into full-scale war. And we must use deception as well. We can create the appearance of weakness while positioning ourselves advantageously. It is a strategy that minimizes risk while maximizing control." First, they deployed reconnaissance units to gather real-time intelligence on enemy fleets. Then, they executed minor skirmishes designed to mislead rivals into believing the craft defenses were weaker than they actually were. Each move was carefully calculated, a balance of strategy and subtlety. The final phase of the operation involved intercepting the coalition's key leaders. Using the intelligence gathered, Alara coordinated a simultaneous deployment of elite units to neutralize the threat without causing unnecessary casualties. The operation required flawless execution, and she worked tirelessly to ensure every detail was accounted for. When the operation concluded, the result was extraordinary. The rival factions were disrupted, their plans foiled, and intelligence was recovered that would prevent future attacks. Xyler observed the outcome with silent approval, noting the effectiveness of her strategies. "You have prevented chaos and secured our position," he said quietly. "Few humans could achieve this." "It was a coordinated effort," she said. "The key is preparation and adaptation. Predicting moves before they happen allows us to maintain control." The perception of humanity shifted. Where once humans were dismissed as weak, they were now seen as clever, resourceful, and capable of influencing galactic events. Even within the Krath Empire, attitudes began to change. Officers who had initially questioned her presence now sought her guidance. They observed how she anticipated threats, managed crises, and adapted strategies in real time. Her ability to combine human creativity with Krath discipline created an advantage that no enemy had anticipated. As weeks passed, Alara continued to strengthen the alliance between humans and Krath. She implemented new communication protocols, integrated human technological innovations, and trained officers in methods that leveraged human adaptability. These efforts enhanced efficiency, reduced risk, and fostered cooperation among previously skeptical officers. One afternoon, a high-level council meeting convened to address the growing threat from rival empires. Xyler, seated at the head of the table, invited Alara to present her assessment. She outlined the intelligence she had gathered, proposed strategies for defense, and highlighted opportunities for diplomatic engagement. Her presentation was clear, concise, and persuasive. When she finished, Xyler spoke. "The human's assessment is thorough. Her strategies are sound and must be implemented." His acknowledgement carried weight. Officers who had doubted her abilities now deferred to her judgment without question. The council approved her recommendations, and Alara oversaw the deployment of new defensive measures. The result was a stabilization of contested regions and a reduction in enemy incursions. Human colonies reported improved security, and the Krath leadership recognized the effectiveness of her approach. Despite the successes, Alara remained vigilant. She knew that rival empires would continue to test boundaries and that the galaxy was far from stable. Her focus remained on preparation, anticipation, and adaptability. She analyzed every report, every movement, and every decision, ensuring that potential threats were addressed before they could escalate. Her growing influence also allowed her to advocate for humanitarian measures. She proposed strategies that protected civilian populations, reduced unnecessary conflict, and ensured that colonies could thrive. Xyler, initially skeptical, began to support these initiatives, recognizing that stability and goodwill were as important as military strength. During this period, Alara and Xyler's working relationship deepened. While personal warmth remained limited, a mutual understanding had developed. Xyler respected her intellect, judgment, and ability to remain calm under pressure. Alara, in turn, recognized the general's experience, discipline, and strategic insight. Together, they formed a partnership that balanced creativity with precision, adaptability with authority. One evening, as they reviewed reports from a recent operation, Xyler made an observation. "You think several steps ahead. You account for consequences that most do not even consider." That is valuable. Alara understood that her influence was shaping not only immediate outcomes, but also the long-term strategic approach of the Krath Empire. Humans, once dismissed as weak, were beginning to be seen as capable partners, their potential respected and feared by rivals. As the months progressed, Alara's strategies continued to yield results. She coordinated intelligence networks, implemented innovative defensive measures, and ensured that human colonies remained secure. Her presence strengthened the alliance with the Krath and enhanced the perception of humanity across the galaxy. Rival empires began to hesitate, recognizing that any attempt to exploit perceived weaknesses could result in failure. Even minor incursions were met with precise, calculated responses that disrupted enemy plans without unnecessary escalation. Humanity, once underestimated, had become a force to be reckoned with. Alara reflected on her journey from a human diplomat forced into an alien marriage to a strategist whose insight shaped galactic events. She had earned respect through intellect, courage, and adaptability. Her partnership with Xyler, though unconventional, had become a cornerstone of stability and influence within the Krath Empire. She understood that the challenges were far from over. Rival factions would continue to test boundaries, and new threats would emerge. Yet she also knew that humans had proven their capability. Through careful planning, strategic thinking, and collaboration, they could not only survive but thrive. And as Alara gazed out over the lights of the Krath capital, she recognized a truth that had become increasingly clear. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and that mistake was beginning to work in their favor. With intelligence, courage, and determination, humans were carving out a place among the stars that no one would soon forget. Alara Vance stood at the observation deck of the Krath capital, her eyes scanning the stars that stretched endlessly beyond the reinforced glass. The galaxy had changed in ways she had never imagined when she first stepped onto this alien world. She had arrived as a human diplomat, forced into an alien marriage with a general 33 years her senior, uncertain and wary of the vast and unfamiliar culture. Now, she was a strategist whose influence had shaped entire star systems, earning respect from those who had once dismissed her species. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Xyler. The general moved with his usual precision, each of his 4 arms gesturing in controlled motion. He was silent for a moment, observing the activity on the decks below. Then he spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of command. "The outer systems report stability," he said. "Your strategies have prevented uprisings and safeguarded the colonies. Few humans could achieve what you have. Humans and Krath working together can achieve more than either alone. Their ingenuity could rival the most disciplined alien minds, and their determination made them resilient beyond expectation." The next challenge arrived sooner than anticipated. Intelligence indicated that a coalition of rival empires was forming, aiming to counter the growing influence of the Krath and its human allies. They sought to destabilize the outer colonies and undermine the authority of the Krath leadership. Alara immediately began analyzing the reports, her mind working through every possible scenario, every potential outcome, and every risk. "Your input is required," Xyler said, gesturing to the central command interface. "We must respond before they act. We need a strategy that disrupts their communication, neutralizes their key units, and maintains stability for our colonies." The plan relied on the element of surprise and on human ingenuity, blending conventional Krath methods with adaptive strategies that opponents would not expect. The operation was set into motion. Alara coordinated teams across multiple star systems, ensuring that each unit understood their role and the timing of their actions. Drones, advanced sensor arrays, and human-designed predictive models were used to anticipate enemy moves. The coalition, confident in their numerical superiority, was unprepared for the level of coordination and foresight that Alara had orchestrated. When the fleets engaged, the results were decisive. Rival forces were disrupted, their supply lines severed, and communication networks compromised. The coalition's plans unraveled faster than they could react, and several key leaders were captured or neutralized without loss of life. Human colonies and Krath forces reported minimal damage, and stability returned to the contested regions. Xyler observed the operation from the command platform, noting the precision and effectiveness of Alara's strategies. "Your foresight has prevented a war that could have lasted decades," he said. "You have done what few could accomplish." Rival empires began to reconsider their approach, recognizing that humans were not to be underestimated. The perception of humanity shifted from weakness to competence, from vulnerability to strategic capability. Across the galaxy, whispers circulated of the human who had outmaneuvered entire coalitions, influencing the outcome of conflicts without unnecessary violence. Within the Krath Empire, Alara's reputation was solidified. Officers who had once questioned her presence now sought her guidance, recognizing the value of her perspective. Her strategies had not only protected colonies, but had also fostered cooperation between human and Krath forces, creating a model for future collaboration. Xyler, too, had changed. While he remained disciplined and precise, his interactions with Alara had become more collaborative. He consulted her on political matters, military operations, and even on the management of colonies. Their partnership, built on mutual respect and shared intelligence, had become a cornerstone of stability within the Empire. One evening, as they reviewed reports from a recent operation, Xyler spoke quietly. "You have demonstrated that humans are capable of more than we imagined," he said. "Your creativity, your foresight, your ability to adapt, these qualities have changed the course of our actions. The galaxy will remember this." "Humans have always had potential," she replied. "They just needed the chance to show it. Now others see what we are capable of." She oversaw the development of advanced communication networks, training programs, and adaptive defense systems that combined human creativity with Krath discipline. The results were extraordinary. Stability, efficiency, and cooperation increased across multiple star systems. Rival empires, once confident in their superiority, began to approach with caution. They recognized that any attempt to challenge the Krath-human alliance could result in decisive defeat. Even minor provocations were met with calculated responses, demonstrating the power of collaboration and strategic foresight. As her influence grew, Alara also focused on long-term diplomacy. She encouraged cultural exchanges between human colonies and Krath systems, facilitated joint scientific research, and promoted education programs that highlighted the strengths of both species. These efforts fostered understanding, reduced tensions, and ensured that cooperation extended beyond immediate military concerns. Xyler, observing her work, spoke one evening as they reviewed reports from a new colony project. "You are shaping the future, not just defending it," he said. "Your influence extends beyond immediate concerns. That is remarkable. We must plan, adapt, and ensure that our actions have lasting impact." She had faced skepticism, doubt, and the challenge of navigating an unfamiliar culture. Yet through intellect, strategy, and determination, she had transformed her position into one of influence and authority. The human colonies, once seen as fragile and insignificant, were now respected participants in galactic affairs. They had demonstrated creativity, resilience, and strategic insight that rival empires could no longer ignore. And the Krath Empire, once dismissive of humanity, had come to recognize the value of human thought and collaboration. Even Xyler, the general she had been forced to marry, had acknowledged her abilities and incorporated her strategies into the core of his command. Their partnership, founded on necessity, had evolved into a formidable alliance that combined experience, discipline, and ingenuity. As the galaxy began to stabilize, Alara turned her attention to the next phase, ensuring that humanity's achievements were recognized and sustained. She advocated for policies that promoted equal representation for human colonies, strengthened alliances, and encouraged shared governance in regions previously considered too distant or insignificant. Her approach balanced strategy with diplomacy, ensuring that humans had a voice without provoking unnecessary conflict. The results were immediate and lasting. Human colonies flourished, trade networks expanded, and cultural exchanges increased. The perception of humanity shifted from a species to be feared or dismissed to one to be respected and valued. Across the galaxy, leaders began to acknowledge that the combination of human ingenuity and Krath discipline created a power that could not be ignored. Alara stood once more at the observation deck, reflecting on the changes she had helped bring about. The stars stretched endlessly before her, a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy and the challenges that lay ahead. Yet she also recognized the progress that had been made, the influence humanity had gained, and the stability that now existed across multiple star systems. Xyler joined her, his expression calm but attentive. "You have ensured that humanity is respected," he said. "That is no small achievement. The galaxy has learned to respect us." Humans had gained recognition, respect, and influence. Their ingenuity and courage had reshaped the course of galactic events, proving that they were a species to be counted among the stars. As she turned to leave the observation deck, Alara felt a sense of fulfillment. She had transformed her position from one of necessity into one of power and respect. The galaxy, once dismissive, now saw humanity as capable, strategic, and resilient. And as long as she continued to guide and protect them, that respect would endure. The human who had been forced into an alien marriage had not only survived but had changed the galaxy. And in doing so, she had ensured that humanity's place among the stars was secure, respected, and celebrated. The galaxy would remember this. The galaxy would regret ever underestimating humanity.